Ah, hi guys.
Hi.
Hi.
This
Nice
works out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have you ever used this before?
I did. It's the first time I actually hosted, but I'm very proud that it was within my technical capabilities.
So are we. Hey, thank you very much for joining us, and thanks for agreeing to the interview.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe we should introduce ourselves first. So my name is Nicolae Zamsa, and I studied graphic design at the Zurich University of the Arts. And now I do some graphic design and some type design.
Yes, also from my side, thank you. My name is Samara Keller. I study visual communication at the Zurich University of the Arts. And yeah, I also like to design some typefaces in my free time. Yeah, we thought we could start with a quick lightning round with some short questions. And yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm prepared and ready.
Cool. And if anybody who's watching this on Instagram has questions for Noël, they can write them in the comments, and me and Samara are going to read them out to him. So it's an interactive interview. Yeah, and our
Apparently
first question.
people are really into my sweater or into your sweater. It's unclear.
I love the sweaters. Yeah, we match. We're like wearing turtlenecks.
We're actually really disappointed.
Oh, you like Steve Jobs? You go full on Steve Jobs tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start. I'm prepared for the questioning.
Okay, cool.
Grill me.
The one is Serif or Sans, Noël?
Sans.
Oh.
Universe or Helvetica?
Universe.
Do you have a type design hero?
My hero would be Adrian Frutiger, and
I knew it.
I have his life's work.
Oh, that's the best. That's the best. Really good book. Really good book.
I have it signed by himself with a heart.
Whoa.
With a heart? Nice.
Oh, that's really nice. Oh, that's pretty cool. I'm very jealous.
So what's the most popular font that you hate?
Well, this answer will be probably a bit controversial, but it's Frutiger as well.
Oh.
What?
The typeface Frutiger.
Yeah, I hate it.
Why?
I think I don't know, it's overused in the most ugly way. And I think oftentimes people think, when I think of Swiss design or Swiss typography, what's the most used typeface in Switzerland is Helvetica, but actually I feel it's Frutiger. And it's being totally overused because it has this reputation to be the most legible typeface. And I appreciate it for its history and functionality, but I really despise it for its aesthetics. The worst one is probably Frutiger Light 45 or something. Is the ugliest.
Okay, cool.
Kind of get it.
Oh, good answer. What's your favorite character?
I think I'm very conservative. I like the A, lowercase a. It's just how you start. Yeah. And I think usually the A's I do are pretty good, and then in every typeface I look at, the set is usually the worst designed character, or the X, just because you usually go through the alphabet, and then at the end you think it's just like, let's get it over with.
Yeah, it makes kind of sense.
Yeah, that's true. Do you go through the alphabet yourself? Do you go A to Z, or do you start with Hopek or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, when proofing, I go A to Z, and sometimes I realize that that's stupid. So sometimes, if I feel very wild, I go Z to A when I'm checking the characters. So I think actually X is an extremely difficult character to design, and doesn't get enough attention.
Speaking of difficult characters, what do you think? Yeah. Which character is harder to design, the G or the S?
Oh, difficult question. I mean, first of all, it depends on the G. If it's a two-story G, that's extremely complicated to design. Mm-hmm. But with the two-story G, you usually have a serif typeface, so mistakes, because the character is so complicated, are easy to hide, but the S has to be spot on, so I would go with the S. It's more complicated. Because the S is never a static character. It always has to slightly tip in one or the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we find both of them tough. Which programs do you use to make your fonts?
Nowadays I use glyphs, and we switched over to glyphs just simply for the reason that it's to us it feels the most intuitive to work.
Mm-hmm. Which program did you use before?
I used FontLab for a long time while I was a student. Then I switched to RoboFont, and then like internally we had this battle of the font editing tools. So our senior type designer would go with RoboFont, with glyphs, and I would go with RoboFont, and it's unfortunately one of the battles I lost in my life as a designer. So we now switch to glyphs.
So is it Thierry who liked it? Or?
It's Reto who liked it, and if you would know Reto, you would know that if once he likes something, you cannot change his mind.
Okay. And which glyphs extensions do you use, or do you use any?
We use a bunch of scripts, and we also had recently an internal workshop where we do that once a year, where we review what setup we use, and Reto usually does that. Again, Reto is our senior type designer. He's very specific about those things, and we are actually planning to make that a bit like public, how we work with glyphs. And we will have this series where we give our followers a bit behind the scene look on how to set up like font software and what glyphs are nice, what scripts are nice to use.
Oh, really cool. Oh, I look forward to that. Nice.
Also, a lot of people always ask us this, and actually we have even like a list of how we set up hotkeys and everything.
Wow, really cool.
So if you work with us, you have to go through that boot camp, else you're not like collaborate.
Oh, interesting. That's really cool.
One quick question from the comments was like, do you have any tips for font pairing?
Font pairing with like Latin fonts or fonts for other scripts?
Yeah. Like, what do you think about pairing Grilli type fonts? Which is like the best pair?
The best pair? Oh, that's a difficult question. You know, now I'm also a bit biased because it's also my own fonts. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I find, for example, Esti and Alpina, they're both by Reto, mm-hmm. and they're both like kind of very his style with his like a bit historical routings and then a lot of quirks in them. I think they pair really nicely together. If you want to pair sans and a serif typeface, for example.
Oh, cool. Nice. We're probably going to move on to the Thunder round now, which are maybe more thought out questions and answers. The first one that we want to ask is, what do you think about revivals?
Yeah, but can you be specific? Revivals? What I think, if they're necessary or if it's interesting or if it's just a rehash?
Yeah, pretty much exactly what you said. Yeah. So is it that you try to create something new always, or with inspiration maybe from the past, or is it also the case that sometimes it's necessary because of new technology to recreate older typefaces? Or should we just let them be?
We kind of have. We don't really have specific revivals, but we have a lot of, many of our fonts are kind of rooted in history, and they pay homage to a certain typographic heritage, which I find interesting, like to resurrect certain shapes that are maybe a little bit lost in time, and to like preserve them also for contemporary designers or for the future. I think it's interesting for revivals if you don't just copy it or try to like path a typeface you find somewhere, but if you take a really close look at the shapes and figure out what the intention was of the designer, and then figure out a way how to transition that aesthetic or that language into a contemporary design. I think that should always be the challenge. If you're just after like tracing old samples, I don't think that's so interesting.
Yeah, I think we agree. We're both not so into that either. But we do love old type books. It's really nice to look at.
Yeah, and I mean, in a way, you always revive with this, like, typographic design is in a way anyway recycling of shapes that have been recycled on and on and on, and through this process of like changing them slightly, it also gradually typographic taste and so on shifts. I mean, it's really interesting. My grandpa had this book, and I found it in his possessions like long after he passed away. And I found his first like journal where he had to write in school, like in the beginning of the 20th century. So like handwriting samples, and it looks extremely beautiful, but I can't read any of it. And it's really interesting how like typographic norms and aesthetics and what you can actually read or recognize has changed over time. I mean, specifically with handwriting.
Yeah, yeah. And especially in Switzerland with Fraktur, because there was a shift away from Fraktur after the war.
Oh, yes, exactly. I mean, Fraktur is extremely difficult to read if you're not used to it.
Yeah.
But also, I think the handwriting that you mentioned is like based on current typefaces, where you have like it's like also broken, how you, broken.
Yeah.
Also, this script handwriting, but it's like the broken one. I think it could be because you see a lot of old people that have like this handwriting.
Yeah, that's true. I also saw this thing that Herit Nurtay wrote about in Letter, where he broke down the way that people write these letters, and he shows how the stroke goes back just like in broken script. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it's extremely interesting. I mean, I personally love handwriting. I think it sometimes gets a bit underappreciated in the digital age.
Yeah, I agree.
So do you think that Grilli type has a style or a studio aesthetic?
Can I get that question back to you and then I answer it?
So in my opinion, in my opinion, I think I don't think that you have kind of studio aesthetic, but I think you have like this really research-based approach to design a typeface, and I think really consistent throughout all your works. And
I mean, there's several people who kind of have a creative influence at Grilli type, and I think you can see that there are different voices that have an effect there. But I would say definitely the process is very Grilli type. Yeah, I kind of see that. But I wouldn't say that it's that like, oh, they always use the same X height or anything like that. I haven't noticed anything like that. I have noticed that you like geometric fonts because you have several.
Yeah, it's because we're just super mainstream.
Yeah.
No, I think if I can answer that maybe a bit in a roundabout way, I think we don't really have. So it's important to differentiate aesthetics, which is kind of for me the manifestation of a conceptual process, and then conceptual approach itself. And for example, in Swiss style, it's Swiss design or Swiss typography and so on, I think historically had a very strong conceptual drive behind it, and then gradually it became a style. And then nowadays I think a lot of people look at Swiss typography or Swiss, it also became named Swiss style in the end, and they think, Swiss style is just if you use this typeface in that way, that's it. But actually that is just basically the surface and the manifestation of a thought process on how to approach design. And if you just reverse it and you just try to copy paste the style, I don't think it really works. And so I think Grilli type doesn't have like a style how we do things, that we are aesthetically very fixed on something, but we have a very, I think, strong conceptual drive on how we approach typography and typeface design, how we publish it, how we discuss it internally. It can get very metaphysical if we discuss typography internally when we talk about things. It sounds like a bit mad because you use all these terms that don't really make sense if you don't understand them. And likewise, when we discuss release typefaces, we discuss very strongly their conceptual approach before we actually discuss how to properly execute that with drawings.
Yeah, really cool. That's really the way I like to work. Yeah.
But
Super theory.
so you have a lot of arguments about style. So you have like a consistent style of the people like so the people like the same kind of styles,
Yeah.
or is there some a disagreement between Noel, you really like serif, but Reto really like sans serifs and stuff.
Yeah, but we usually, when we have discussions about this, it's very important that you don't bring your personal taste into something. It has to be that you judge a design with its inherent qualities. So you look at what is the conceptual idea, and then you look at every character, and every character has to be subordinate to like this conceptual bigger picture. And sometimes you try to do like stylish things or add excess stuff that's unnecessary, and then we plow through that and say, this has to go, this you have to tone back, this is maybe a cool idea but not for this typeface. And then every single character has to kind of, sounds a bit militant now, but it has to fall in line with this concept. Because in the end, every character is paired with every other character, and if one of them is not fitting in the typeface, it's kind of the weakest link in the chain, and it makes the overall design weaker.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I also wanted to read a question that I saw in the comments. It said, it talked about the subscription model for getting typefaces.
Yeah.
So this Netflix approach of just like, oh, I'm just going to subscribe to Grilli Type and then I'll get to use all of their stuff. Is that something that you could see yourself doing?
We like from time to time have like discussions about whether we should like change something in our model and like find different approaches. And I think through technological changes also down the line with, like I saw a lot of people mentioned this also in the comments with variable font and so on, it might also have an impact on how you think about how you license a typographic style. And then again, the question you bring up is, do you license it always in perpetuity, or is it kind of like a subscription model that you subscribe to a certain foundry and so on? And we are like discussing this internally. We don't have any concrete plans to change our current model. And also changing your licensing conditions is kind of complicated actually, because you have like a big list of clients, and then if you change the system halfway through, then all clients before a date are subscribed to a different model and so on.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that I personally don't like paying. Actually, I'm the opposite. I hate paying stuff on a monthly basis. I just rather have like a one-time fee, and then I own it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to own it. I agree. Yeah. One of our questions is, are there many typefaces that you started and haven't finished, like us?
Countless, probably. Like you get maybe to the letter D and you realize it sucks, and then you put it somewhere in the like inspiration folder, and then it's like walked away or something. And no, there's been these days not so much, because I don't really have time. And I think when I started with type design, I was more like having a punk rock attitude of just pooping out stuff, you know, like quick and dirty. And now I also have less time. So when I started typeface, I pay much more attention to the conceptual phase and not go too much into production phase. I think, however, if you're a starting type designer, it's good if you just crank out typefaces, because you will make a lot of mistakes, and just drawing them is helping you a lot to learn while doing it.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. Yeah, thank you. Cool.
So are there any type design rules which do you think that makes no sense?
Rules? Are there rules? Like
these things that you kind of go, oh, well, the B and the P are the same, just flipped upside down in a grotesque, or these kinds of like little things that you see.
I think so. Basically, to say it very radical, there are no overarching rules. I mean, there are rules you define within a typeface design to make it consistent, like what I mentioned before, but there are no like bigger picture rules. For example, there's always a discussion about legibility, and then what is legibility? So legibility means every character should be very different from the other characters, so they're easy to differentiate. And then if you make a serif R and I don't know, a sans serif A in the same typeface, they would look extremely different. So technically that would improve legibility, but it doesn't work that way. And I think if you look at it closely, there are no real rules. However, if you want to end up with a consistent design, you have to make your own rules for every typeface. And typeface like concept can be, it has to be very legible, or it has to like be useful in a certain like area of usage. But that doesn't mean that these like qualities apply to every typeface you'll ever design.
So then do you have some rules at Grilli that you follow for every type, or you really for every single type you start anew?
No, I don't think. I mean, we have some rules how we do things production-wise to make sure that we can deliver the typeface if we publish it in a certain quality, of course. But those like include like spacing, kerning, programming, and so on, mastering. But that's like, I would say it's a bit apart from the design process. But within the design process, there are no real rules, at least for me personally.
Cool.
One question from the comments. How much of your starting process is analog, if any?
Well, I mean,
you still
that's
draw.
like this romantic notion. It's this romantic notion that for some reason, like drawing in a book with a pen is like a totally different process from sketching something on in an app. And I understand where that question comes from, but it's not so relevant, I feel. First of all, whether or not you do digital or analog doesn't matter. And then also inspiration, or like imagery you take in, like the process of actually coming up with concepts and ideas anyway happens in your head or in your imaginative space, and that is neither analog or digital. So
yeah.
Yes, it's true.
But I still keep a sketchbook here. I actually
can you show us
stuff like here today? I needed to like figure out some.
Oh.
I did some cutesy calligraphy.
Very cool. Do you have one of those little like broad pens that you use for that? Really nice.
Yeah. And because actually today I was working. I think I mentioned that before. We want to give out more information about how we do type design, because people ask us that so much, and we think it's a fair question, but we should answer it in a little bit more meaningful way. So I'm at the moment setting up kind of these tutorials or like insights into how we work on typefaces, on how we start and what tools we use and how we use them, and what could be interesting for an aspiring type designer.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. We'd be really interested in seeing that.
So stay tuned on the Instagram. Maybe we'll try to publish that as soon as I have a bit more time.
Yeah, that's great. Our experience is also whenever you see another type designer working, you always think, oh, that's weird. Why do you do it that way? I do it this way. And everybody seems to have their own quirks, their own shortcuts.
Yeah, you have to figure out also your own way to do it. Yeah. There's no like way of the samurai, I guess.
Yeah,
that's true.
Way of the type designer. Oh, is it my turn? Sorry.
Yeah. I can also do it.
When you see your typefaces in use, do you still sometimes open up the font file and change stuff even years after you complete them? And then do you release those? Or...
This is probably a question I should answer with no, to protect my own integrity. But as you can imagine, of course, I'm doing that.
Yeah.
No, it's sometimes we do slight updates if we have a very thorough Q&A, but sometimes like little things can slip our attention, and then we update also the software, and like our clients can then download like always the latest software. It's usually just minor changes, but you have to understand that I'm never happy with my designs. Like whenever I read something in my own typeface, I get like I go insane. It's terrible. Like I see every tiny flaw I think it has, and I cannot enjoy the reading experience because I read like a text, and then the text falls apart into sentences, and the sentences into words, and the words into characters, and the characters into like slight kerning errors I don't like or something, and then like I'm totally lost in the rabbit hole. And then sometimes you have to resist the urge to open the font file and try to like make up for it.
Yeah, at 3 in the morning. Oh
Yeah.
no!
I remember distinctively when we released GT Sectra, which has been a few years back now. I thought this typeface is designed on the top of my abilities. Like this is really like, you know, like a benchmark for blah blah blah. Now I look at it and say, wow, okay. Like now myself, 10 years later, I look at it totally different. So, and 10 years from now, I will look at the design I do right now and have a different view of it.
I love it. I still like seeing it in reportage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, yeah.
Today again, actually.
Yeah.
I looked
You
at
see, I cannot read reportage and it gets I mean, it's even worse. I once had, I was also like working with the studio that designed it. So I also typeset like a reportage, which was worse, like typeset your own font in a publication and then have to read it.
Yeah. When I first came to Switzerland, I visited Simon through More, and he was showing it to me. And he was like, "Yeah, I did this with Grilli type." And, yeah,
Simon is a great guy. Yeah, you know him. He's a lovely guy. The Zen master.
Yes, totally.
Why is Zen master?
I don't know. There was this picture of him doing pottery, and he looked like a Zen master.
Yeah. He was actually the last time I saw him was in Japan because he visited the Zen monastery for like 2 weeks. I was very intrigued.
Cool.
It's pretty nice. Currently everybody's working remotely.
Yeah.
How can a typeface be designed remotely?
Well, the question is if it's a collaborative typeface. If usually the typefaces we're working on, someone has like a lead in art direction, or maybe maximum 2 people have something to say in the art direction, and the rest is people that consult or help you out and so on. And we worked remotely pretty much since I think 6 years or so. We are like working wherever we are, and sometimes across different time zones. And for us, it really works out quite well. And to me, type design is not really like a sprint. It's more like a marathon. So you need like time to design and then stop and put it away, do something different, and then pick it up again and have another look at it. And the more you can look at your own designs with a certain distance, the better they turn out, because you can look at things after like you let them rest a bit from a different angle. I guess that's true maybe about everything in life. But
yeah.
Do you also find that you need to take regular breaks, like when you're working on it, that you need to like, oh, I need to go look at outside for 5 minutes because I'm not seeing it anymore, the thicknesses or the curves?
Yeah, I mean, we just actually, like, before we started this call, we rolled out a huge custom typeface for a client, and for the last 2 to 3 weeks we've been concerned with kerning. And I mean, that's really hardcore, you know. You have really to do it not in one go, but this is something you just have to put your mind through it and really go to test sheets. And we usually do that in like duets. So someone does the first draft and then the other person is double checking it. And then at the end, I'm also coming in and giving like a proof of stuff. So we can make sure it has like the best possible quality. So that part of type design you have to do in one go, but there's other, I would say, more conceptual and design decisions where it's good if you have enough time to really let things sink in and have a different look at them.
Your turn.
Yes. Yeah, but I kind of have the same. I'm currently designing italic, and when I look away from the like, I just see everything a little bit slanted. So it's really funny. I
you will probably maybe
have to
I
walk
have,
sideways.
I have to reset my eyes and look at like I don't see. Yeah, I see straight lines, curves. So, yeah,
You have to always walk with a tilt to the left.
Next question. Are letters constructed or written marks? What do you think?
It depends. I mean, in the end, I think they're just shapes, but you can look at them in different ways. You can approach them as in a more constructed way, then you end up with one aesthetic. You can approach them in a very handwritten way, and then you end up with another aesthetic. So I would say they're both of those things. And usually when you design complexer typefaces, when you have like lightweights and bold weights, the lightweights usually like you look at them more as like a stroke, and then the bold weights you look at them more like shapes. You have to like more, like more sculpting in a way.
Yeah, the plastic element plays a bigger role. Yeah.
The people in the comments really want to know what Grilli means.
I already know the answer, that's why I didn't want to ask it.
Yeah.
Classic questions. It means like, what do you think it means? Of course, it means grill with an eye at the end. It's part of our heritage. We started Grilli in 2009 in art school as a kind of a platform for design and things we created. And one of the founding members was Patrick. And Patrick is like Swiss and Finnish, and in Finland you have this grilli kioski, which are like glorified hot dog stands. And if you ever watch like a Aki Kaurismäki movie, they have it. I think in most of his movies, they also have like this grilli kioski somewhere. It's a really classic Finnish thing. And our initial mission statement was we want to retail design like other people would retail hot dogs. So
cool.
That's how it really started.
Very good.
Now I got hungry.
I remember Thierry gave a talk at our school 2 or 3 years ago, and he showed a bunch of pictures that he was collecting of Grilli, where it just said Grilli.
Yeah, we even went on like a trip 5 years ago to Helsinki just to take selfies in front of these Grilli kioskis.
Very good. Excellent. Do you believe in variable fonts? And are they the future, or are they just hype?
Well, I think it's first of all, it's a software format and enables you certain new things to play around with. You can also kind of use the font in a way that maybe was not intended. We did with GT Alpina, we used it the first time, and we did kind of animations within a typeface where you have like icons that like change, for example, like think a balloon that you can blow up, and then you have this animation in a font, which is kind of nice to play around with. And it's a really promising format. Right now, it's still a little bit too cutting edge to be really used properly in a wide area. A lot of software doesn't really support it right now. I could see it become more important in the future, but I don't think it will crucially change the way we think about typography. It will change it a little bit in one direction, but I don't know if for the designer per se it's super important.
Yeah. I think we both feel a little bit disappointed in them, because when they first like became a thing, it was so exciting, and now it's a bit like, oh, okay, you can't really use them or can't really make them so they're useful to people yet.
Yeah, but I think in the future it might, if they're more widely supported, I see like a big potential. Also, the next typeface we're releasing, GT Flexa, will make like heavy usage of being a multi-axis typeface. But I mean, if you know about typefaces, you realize also it's not something new to have multiple axes in a typeface.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just the technology has to renew itself.
That's a good name for a variable font, GT Flexa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Naming is actually the most complicated thing with typefaces.
But good introduction. How do you come up with your names for the typefaces? Do you have like a specific system, or you just come up with stuff in the shower, or how do you go about that?
Hey, the shower story sometimes happens, but it only happens if you're really lucky. But yeah, sometimes it can be a very tough process to actually figure things out. And in my experience, maybe what I can say about it is just make sure that you either don't assign a name to a typeface, or you really make sure that you don't try to change the name later on, because the more you use a name, the more you kind of connect it to the typeface, and that can also have a strong effect on how you consider the typeface or how you're using it. Like, I think the name is something that is not to be underestimated, and if you don't have a good name yet, I would recommend everybody to just don't name them, because once you have a name, it's really hard to get back. I think GT Pressura was named something like M3, and then GT Sectra was named M12, and it sounds silly, but it was really hard to get away from those names and like reassign the name. And then once we figured out that one is GT Pressura, it changed also a bit how we looked at the typeface.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting. Have you ever changed like a character because the name didn't fit?
Oh, yeah.
The character because it didn't look good with the typeface name.
Yeah. Because
no, but we
write the name in the font, it has to look great.
It has, I mean, as you can imagine, a good typeface name has to look good in the typeface. Is one of the most important things. And we're not so superficial to change the design because the name doesn't look good. But we definitely dismiss names if we think it doesn't look interesting enough with the typeface.
Yeah. I have another question. Vertical or diagonal axis, and why?
Can you explain that? What that means exactly?
Yeah, so I'm kind of basing this on the entire idea of humanist type design versus, let's say, more constructed type design. So the humanist axis was more used in, let's say, Renaissance scripts. So the diagonal axis, and the vertical one in more constructed letters like transitional typefaces, Bodoni, even grotesques, or geometric fonts.
And the question is what I like better, or?
Yeah, or which one do you tend to, or which one appeals to you more? Are you more of a humanist type designer, or are you more of like a modernist type designer?
Well, I don't think I'm any of these. I'm just,
okay.
I mean, it's an interesting category, but I never thought about it.
Okay.
It just has to, I think basically I just have to look at the typeface, and it has to for me to evoke some visual world, like some door has to open and it has to invite me in, and I have to look at the typeface and think, oh yeah, this is really inspiring. Oh, this would work great with this color, or this typeface has like this and that feeling, and then becomes interesting kind of regardless from what technical quality you would apply to it.
Okay, cool. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
Very diplomatic answer.
In the beginning, you showed us the Bible, the Adrian Futtiger Bible. What do you think about Futtiger's type weighting classification system?
And why don't you use it?
I think it's actually a pretty cool idea to do that. It never really caught on, unfortunately, but I think we also have to look at that system in the context of when it was introduced, and it was introduced before there was like font software where you would think so much in axes. And I think this programmatic approach of him was very, like, I don't know, very modernist and revolutionary in a way, and also foretelling about the way we would think about typography down the line. And I mean, Universe is like a really, really cool typeface. And it's still, I think it still looks modern. Yeah.
I love it so much. I like to correct it. You know the CK and the CH curve?
Digitalization of Frutiger not always that great, but the typeface itself is amazing.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's the best sounds I know of.
Yeah, Universe is the best.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
What is the future of type design? And that's also a question we saw a lot in the comments.
Yeah.
Will technology keep radically shifting this field, in your opinion?
I think it's really interesting when I first used the Glyphs app. It's interesting because in the Glyphs app you type text, and then within the text typing tool, you can just edit every character. So it's like you typeset something, let's say in InDesign, but at the same time you can go actually and change the design of like separate characters. And to me, that was really interesting moment when I used that app, because I realized, actually, what you're doing when you're doing typesetting is just you put a bunch of shapes on the screen and you look if it works and if it's legible or like pleasant to read, or it fits what you intended. And with modern type editing software, it gives you like one more step. Usually you had to use somebody else's font and then you just worked with that, but now you can also edit that tool. And I like to think about type design as one discipline of like working as a graphic designer or working as but when I say graphic designer, it's because what then again is a graphic designer. I think in the end, with software that is easier to use, it will be easier to use to do also your own fonts, because there's not so many technical restrictions. And with that, I think we will in the future approach typefaces more like one other thing that you're customizing, or like you're changing the way you want it. And I would recommend everyone that does type design to keep like a multidisciplinary mind, not to focus just on that, but to actually think about visual design in a bigger picture, with also interest in photography or filmmaking or animation or illustration. It's all the same.
Yeah, that's a good approach.
That's a good approach.
That's cool. It also ties in a little bit with this thing that's become very popular lately, especially, at least, that every company wants a custom typeface, which is good news for us.
Great news.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
Nice that it's popular.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because if you do a redesign as a company, you don't have to like do a logo even and so on, but you basically don't get around having a typeface if you want to communicate visually. I mean, yeah, maybe that you could do it without it, but it's usually one of the core assets of a brand is a typeface. And I think it makes sense. If you want to have a very stripped down design, even you need a typeface. And the typeface is usually, it's kind of like an ambassador for a brand. It's like the first person that talks to your client or to a person that's potentially interested in what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a good way of seeing it.
Yes. Now we are both thinking of maybe studying type design.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to ask why you didn't study type design.
Because we're thinking of doing a master's at The Hague or at Reading or something like that. But
I was also considering that. I don't know. I mean, it's maybe personal from my personal biography. I was studying in Bern, which they didn't really have any type design program or anything. And I thought, maybe I can do a master in type design. I'm interested in that. And I did an internship like now a long time ago, and I went to Berlin to work with Stefan Müller, and he's like co-founder of Line 2, and I got to work in the same studio as him, and it was very interesting how he works. Even though he's a type designer, he did mostly graphic design, and I talked with him also a lot about type design and typography, and I for myself figured out that type design, or maybe also at that time, what the Swiss approach to type design is for me, is more graphic designers that do typefaces, and not so much an artisanal approach to typography, where you could also say I'm just an artist or a creator of typefaces. And for me, that experience doing like working with him had like the effect on me that I thought, oh, actually, if I want to become a good type designer, I have to become a good graphic designer first to actually understand typography or to learn more about that. And those two things cannot be separated. And that was my personal path, why I didn't end up going to Den Haag. And for me, it really worked out, but I'm also a very like learning by doing kind of guy. And I mean, who knows, maybe it would have been beneficial to me if I would have ever had formal training, but I ended up never having formal training. And the training I got was from really close friends and collaborators that are all involved in Grilli type, like Tobias Rechsteiner, Thierry Blancpain, Rito Moser. When we were studying together in art school, had this self-help group. And in a way, we're all part of Grilli type now. And that, you know, is still a bit like this self-help group is intact.
Oh, that's really nice.
Sounds really
that's
nice.
what we're doing. What we're trying to do now with Type Club Zurich. That's a good description. It's a self-help group for
Yeah, it's a self-help.
it's a
Yeah, no, it's
anyway, an addiction.
You can either, I mean, if you go to Den Haag, it's a good idea because then you have the self-help group is already set up for you. If not, it's also possible to do it in a non-academic way. But the most important thing in both situations is that you make connections with other people. It's also not so much about the art school, but if you go to Den Haag, you can connect to a lot of like really nice people. You can make friends. You have a different experience and so on. So
that's true. Yeah. You mentioned before about the idea that there'd be a craftsman approach versus graphic designers who do type design.
Yeah.
And it maybe does reflect a little bit, let's say, Dutch versus Swiss type design. Is there like a character to Swiss type design? Because I really feel what you said, that it's graphic designers doing type design, that you really kind of see that.
Well, I mean, now there's also programs in Switzerland where you do type design. So, and that statement from myself, I'm not sure if I can make that qualified statement. That's for me more a personal feeling, how I think about typography. I feel Switzerland compared to the Netherlands has, I mean, the Netherlands compared to Switzerland have a long history in type design. Switzerland doesn't have a long history in type design. We have like maybe longer or more famous history in typography. And I think the Netherlands came to type design really through the trade of lead type and retailing lead type, whereas Switzerland, when the Dutch were retailing lead type, we still only had cows and mountains, basically. And our maybe heritage in type design more with this Swiss modernism and usage of type design. And I think it's really crucial that you understand graphic design and typography if you're doing type design. You cannot just be kind of detached from that whole world and cater to other type designers. You have to understand the people that will end up using your fonts.
Yeah,
that's true.
Cool. Yeah. How do you feel about kerning and hinting? And do you do it all yourself?
We do it internally, some of it with hinting. We work also with people that help us with that, like as a service. And I think it's just a part of the software production aspect. I think especially hinting is really tedious. Kerning, it has a bit more a design aspect, but it's pretty boring still.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. But it's a good, actually, what's good about kerning, just to put that out there, it's a good last. I talked to Christian Schwartz from Commercial Type, and he told me, you know, you can never outsource this because this is kind of the last polish, you know, it's like if you finished your painting and you put the varnish on it, you know, like, and then you find like all these little things that you didn't do correctly because those things then turn out as like difficult kerning pairs where you realize actually it's a design choice gone wrong. So it's a good thing to give it like last polish, and it's like an honor thing. You have to do it in the end.
It's like the cherry on top.
Yeah. And you have to go all the way. So yes, we're doing that internally, but again, we have like full backup of the self-help and self-help group.
Self-help.
It's part of the way of the samurai. Have to go through it. I also wanted to ask how many weights or how many styles is too many styles? Because we used GT America for the animation that we made for this thing. And then it was really interesting to us to go through it and see like, okay, bold and extended and expanded. And we had so much choice. Do you like making like tons and tons of weights and styles for every face?
Well, it's the two answers to this. After America, I made an internal pledge. We never do this again because it's a clusterfuck of a mess to design a font like that. And now we're like before the release of GT Flexa, which basically tops the amount of styles of GT America. So I would recommend really don't do it. Don't do it if you don't have to, because it's so much time and you have to be really clear that the basic design is right, because if it's shitty, it won't make it better somehow because you have it in different weights and widths and so on. And if it's needed or not, I think it has to do with, again, the conceptual question. If your concept of the typeface is that it's this typeface in these 5 weights, that's the typeface, and that's how it's supposed to use, then the accent of the design is more on the individual maybe styles. And when you do it in a ton of styles, kind of the idea of one typeface width or weight vanishes, and it becomes more about this universe, Frutiger style idea of a design space, which is also really interesting. It's a bit 2 different worlds. And you as a designer, you have to make the decision where you want to go with it. And I think it's sometimes I see that with type designs that they start too early to expand in different weights and widths while the core design is not yet decided. And then once you have all these styles and you have to correct one character, you have to do it like 20 times.
Yeah, it's a pain, yeah. And do you have like a typeface that you're most proud of, or maybe it hasn't arrived yet? Is there like your
let's say like this, if I ever have one that I'm most proud of, I think it's the peak of my design. I will probably retire, so hasn't happened yet.
That's good. No magnum opus.
I hope you never make it.
No, it's impossible. Don't worry. I'm too detail obsessed.
Oh, cool. That's all of our questions.
Yes.
And most of the really nice ones we found in the comments. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for taking the initiative and do that. I mean, most of us are a bit stuck at home, and I think it's a cool idea that you started this project right now, and I think you should like keep it going.
Yeah, we will. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
If you ever want to rename it to Typographic Self-Help Group Zurich, it's okay. I give you permission to use that brand name.
Thank you. Nice. We have no else.
Okay, that's good. Maybe we can change it.
Yeah, last answer here is like fondue or raclette, and I will close that with saying fondue. Again, very, very controversial. So.
Oh, no.
For me, it's fondue as well.
For me, raclette.
Okay, I'm not.
Oh, no, don't start fighting. This is how in Switzerland.
I'm not Swiss. I don't have a vote.
Yeah, he's not Swiss.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice
Wish you all the best, and let's stay in touch. Don't hesitate if you ever want to get in touch.
And we really look forward to your videos about how to make a typeface, how to set up.
Yes.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that too. I just have to make more time to do them.
Then we can see if we do it right. Then we can see if we're doing it right.
Yeah, or we can see if they're doing it.
No, okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you.
Thank you.
How do we...